Stop talking about comic books or I'll kill you. I don't care if the Hulk could defeat the Man of Steel. I'm gonna rearrange your face if you continue to debate whether Logan's claws could pierce Steve Rogers' shield. I just couldn't care less if they bring back Kraven. And I don't care if Spider-Man's a clone. Stop spending all our cash on back issues of The Flash, or I swear to God you're gonna spend your 12 years alone. You can call them graphic novels. They're still just plain old comic books to me. And I don't see why you must always ceaselessly discuss the post-zero-hour continuity. For the last time, I won't read those curvy X-Men. You know that I prefer the work he did for DC. And if you don't want to die, you'll lose that other street price guide, Comic Buyer's Guide, and Wizard Magazine. But please get the new Invisibles for me.
Hello. Good evening. I am Well-Read Pig, and there has been a change in your regularly scheduled broadcasting. I am hosting tonight. I hope you're all doing well. We've got a interesting show for you tonight, I think, but maybe not. Maybe not. We all know how these streams go. They're terribly monotone and boring. But before we get into it, let's have a quick look in the chat. So Wilberforce Worcester says soon. Well, it's actually now Worcester. Villeneuve says I think it's a she, loves the J. Lee covers. We also have F off Well Read saying there will be spice. And Mr. Yonafui says he who controls the spice controls the universe. Oh, I guess we'll have to wait and see about that. That's debatable. We also have Hothead Studios saying hail to the chat with a hand-waving emoji. Welcome, Hothead. Always great to have you here. Always great to have Hothead Studios in the chat. Oh, great. We've got Jabba the Coach as well. He says, shut up, Dark Gift is on. Well, I'm sure you're missing something riveting there. We also have Yucky Gum. What the fuck is spice? It's the only thing I hear of Dune. I agree. I suppose we'll get into it when the other guys come on, but I don't really know much about Dune, which is why I'm hosting tonight, because I'll be coming across as the person asking the questions, as someone interested in not only the comic book, but I guess the franchise. We also have everyone's favorite chat troll, Mr. Amit Rayner. He says, hello, everyone. Shut up, Amit. And I think that's everybody. So without further ado, I guess we shall bring on our co-hosts tonight, which is Well-Read User.
Good evening.
Great to have you here, Well-Read. Welcome to my new channel.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem at all. And the always great Duneshine.
Wait, who is hosting? You both sound exactly the same.
Well, let's not start this again.
I'm doing my best Australian accent right now.
It's subpar. It's very subpar.
Damn it. I have to keep working on it.
Can you
Somebody
at least
pass
move
me.
yourself into the host location, Well-Read Pig?
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, perfect.
And I'll
So-
move over
Oh, you're at the bottom now, Well-Read.
Or to
where
the
I
side.
belong.
This is a takeover.
Quite hostile.
All right, so gentlemen, before we get into it, did you have anything you'd like to say to the chat? Any messages? Any?
I think
Chit-chat.
Amit is playing out the argument Risey and Edward had between the Imperials and the Ewoks. It's just the Freemen are the Ewoks.
Okay, yeah, the Freeman. I did read some of the comics, and I noticed that was a term brought up. I guess we can get into that once the review starts.
We don't get into the Sad Dakar in these books, though. I don't think we do, at least.
Okay, well, I have
I think
no
maybe
idea.
in the background, but besides that,
I have no idea who the Sandikar are or why they're important, but I'm looking forward to learning. Well, Red, would you like to address the chat? Or address me as host?
Oh, well, it's wonderful to have you hosting tonight, well-read Peeg. I'm sure you'll be much more interesting and not boring at all, unlike that other host, well-read user, who bores me to death.
I thought you were about to say Vicky.
No,
Don't tell her I said that.
I just think of those leg shots whenever she's hosting, and I'm completely distracted from anything she's saying. So, she's a wonderful host.
They are distracting. We also have Simple Jack joining us in the chat, and he says, "Hail, hail to you, Simple Jack."
Don't ignore James Hayes.
And we also have James Hayes, of course. Great to have him here. Always, he's one of our regulars. Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great day. I'm having a great day, James, because this is now my channel. This is now my show. We're taking it in a new direction, and I think you'll all hate it just as much as you normally do.
Perfect. The chat, you're now free to argue and call each other names.
Yes, I'm sure Dark Gift did something to annoy everybody. So
I think he's busy tonight closing his book or something.
Well, he doesn't have to be here for us to hate him.
Well, we don't hate him, just the chat does.
Poor Dark Gift. I guess this is a little something we could discuss before we get into our review, because we'd like to talk about topical things, I guess. Apparently, Preston Poulter refunded poor Dark Gift's cover, and Testify got the blame for it somehow.
Because they always work together.
Yeah, well, that's the dynamic duo is Preston Poulter and Testify. I mean, they're quite close. Quite close. They definitely don't dislike each other.
Definitely closer than Preston Poulter and Moby. Like, they're two sides of a different coin.
Yes.
Well, how did 5 people refund? That's the thing that kind of confuses me. It wasn't just Preston, right?
Yeah, I heard it was around 5. I think maybe even some of Preston's friends backed it, and then when he refunded, they did. I'm not accusing it of being coordinated or anything, but I'm just not sure.
Or it could just be, I don't know if Dark Gift knows if they were long-time backers, or he knows when they backed and refunded. So I could speculate all night. I don't really care.
Yeah. I think I agree with that.
Obviously, he's probably not going to say who, because that would not be a good thing to do. So.
Yeah, I know people are a bit sensitive about that since I think Bean from PA or PA or whatever you want to call her was I guess publicly outed as refunding Cyberfrog, and it caused a little bit of a drama back in the day. So I guess,
think only her username is outed though.
Yeah, not a real name or anything like that. However, moving on. Jabba the Coach says, "Can we send Smug to the kennel?" I came from the kennel, Jabba. I'm now in a loving home. But moving on tonight, we're going to be talking about Dune by Boom Studios, a mainstream book series. Obviously, there's a lot of source material for this comic book. I believe there's a book series and a movie, and I think a mini series as well. So there's a lot of expanded media out there for Dune.
Yeah, so this isn't the original Dune. This is Dune House of Atreides, which is a prequel, which the first of the series was written in 1999.
Okay. Well,
so it's a prequel series, yeah.
Before we get into the comic book, in case there's any dum-dums in the chat who don't know anything about Dune, or maybe even a dum-dum on this very panel who's hosting the show who knows nothing about this series whatsoever, I'd like to ask, are you both familiar with the source material? Have you read the books? Have you watched the film?
I read the original book and a couple of the sequels, but it's been a while.
I've only watched the David Lynch movie, and this series is the second outing I've had with Dune.
It's pretty much the series that invented the term space opera. It's if you know nothing about it, it's kind of like Game of Thrones in space, going through a current example of a series, I guess. There's actually very little science. It's more theology and the human condition and just religions even thrown in. There's not too much science. It's more mysticism than a science fiction series.
Okay, cool.
I felt
Because
like it was.
oh, sorry, you go.
I'm sorry. I felt like it was heavy on palace intrigue, is the way I would put it, probably.
I have no idea what that means, but thanks for sharing, Well Read. What is Pala's intrigue for any dum-dums? Again, in the chat, the dum-dums in the chat who don't know.
I don't know what James Hayes' question. I don't remember Boom Studios being in a controversy with CG.
Either do I.
I remember Antarctic Press. I remember Dynamite, but I don't know anything about Boom Studios.
Yeah, as far as I know, Boom Studios tends to fly under the radar of a lot of people. I mean, they've only really, I think, gained a lot of prominence recently with the Berserker comic and their Power Rangers crowdfunders, which both did remarkably well. But otherwise, I've never really heard of Boom, and until Berserker, I had never read any of their comics either. But moving on, so do you guys want to give, again, the dum-dums, just a quick synopsis? Like, what is Dune from the books and the movies? It's obviously a sci-fi. What is it about?
Well, it's essentially the main character is Paul Atreides. This is a prequel of his house. Essentially, they get trapped into taking over Dune, which has a substance called spice, which the whole universe needs. People, like the rich, eat it, and it like gives you like mental powers, and you can't travel through space without it because you need to predict something before it happens. Because if you're traveling faster than the speed of light, obviously you can't see things that travel. And then there's a backstory about how you can't have thinking machines, so like computers are outlawed and things like that. So it's kind of this society that's in the future, but it still has kind of more of like almost a legend, kind of a mythic social structure, kind of like Arthurian legends or something.
So that's a lot of lore that's it's not really explored that much in these first two issues.
Yeah.
Other than there is this planet, Dune. They call it by a different name, Arcus, I think.
Yeah, that's the official name.
And it has this substance called spice that seems to have accelerated the evolution of humanity in a technological way by giving them the ability to have interstellar space travel plus longevity in their lifespan. So those things have put them on a plateau that they didn't seem to be capable of reaching prior to discovering this substance. So it has great value, and it's mined and coveted quite heavily. And I think the pursuit of it all surrounds this, what I mentioned earlier, palace intrigue, where there are these different houses all vying for control and influence. So it's very much like Game of Thrones, but without the sex.
Yeah, it's like a feudal society in space.
Yeah.
Okay. So I did flick through the first two issues, and I noticed there seems to be houses and an emperor. I think there's an imperium that's referenced. So this is almost like a blend, I guess, of maybe like a feudal society in space. Would that be correct?
The emperor doesn't have universal power. There's also the Landsrecht, which is like the collection of the house. So there's a conflict, and then there's religious powers as well.
There's
okay,
dukes,
cool.
There's dukes and there's earls. So very much like a feudal society.
Okay, because my knowledge, and I'm guessing this knowledge will be also, I guess, some of our viewers might feel the same way. The only thing I really know about Dune is the memes. So I know there's giant worm monsters. I know there's this drug called spice. But other than that, a complete blank slate. So did you guys, having watched the movie and read the books, do you guys feel that this prequel story does do the world of Dune justice? Is it adding anything to the story? Does it justify its existence, or is it just
Well,
fluff or filler?
I haven't actually read the books that this is based on, but from what I heard, it's pretty popular, kind of with the fantasy sci-fi. The critiques is it's a lot simpler than Dune. I don't think it goes into the philosophy and like this struggling of human condition and what is like a man. There's a lot of kind of just thinking and questioning in the Dune proper series. This is more of just events and intrigue. So I mean, it depends on what you like.
Okay, and how about you, Well Read? Having watched the movie, do you feel that these comics were a beneficial addition to the universe of Dune? Do they need to exist? As far as you've read, is it adding to the mythos and the universe?
So from what I understand, the movie that I saw, the David Lynch, is considered an apostate to the Doom saga. People deride it. They don't think it's very good. This does seem to focus on a lot of established lore that's from the series, but without needing you to be intimately familiar with it. So it feels like it's exploring some new aspect of the Dune saga, just by the fact that it's establishing a lot of new plot points and only tangentially mentioning things from the other books.
Okay. It seems like we do have some users in the chat who are familiar. Amit Rayner seems to know a fair bit about Dune. He says, Simple Jack, the Space Guild hold the technology of space travel. And then Mr. Yonafui expresses an opinion saying, this prequel is shit. It is just an experiment from Kevin Anderson to watch if he could take control of the franchise. So obviously some people feel very strongly about the series in the chat. But let's dive into the comic books. Just early impressions. What did you guys think? Did you enjoy reading it?
I can say that I don't want to give a strong enjoy or not enjoy statement. I kind of understand where Duneshine comes from when he's reluctant to give scores. I would like to talk about if it's competent or not. I felt that this series was very dense, was my impression going through it. And
would you care to elaborate on that? How was it dense?
So I felt especially the first issue was very verbose, so lots of words, very stagnant, lots of introduction, people just standing around and talking. Not a lot of motion activity, not utilizing the visual medium that is comics. But what it was trying to accomplish seemed to be done adequately well. And I guess we'll get into that more later when we get into the details. But it's not a read for every reader, is the way I'd put it. It seems to approach it from a novelist's hand, and
which
doesn't
the
necessarily.
two writers are. Those
Yeah.
are the two writers of the novels.
And is not doesn't implicitly adopt the comic medium, and in the first issue anyway.
Did you feel the same way as Well Read, Duneshine?
Well, I started this series, I think, on issue 3, and I've had to go back to this. I would say issue 1 is probably the weakest of all of them. It's not very exciting. It's trying to set it up, and then obviously there's a lot to set up. You have characters, you have planets, you have kind of the society. So if you know any of this already, it's kind of dull, I would say.
Okay, so we have a few questions from the chat.
I mean, there's good drawings like there. That looks pretty neat. This is arriving on the Arcus, which is Dune.
Okay, yeah, actually, this double-page spread looks really well done. I thought it looked nice when I just had a peek at it. Yucky Gum has a question. He asks, "Do the people of Dune come from that planet, or did they travel there?"
Well, most like the Empire's people like are traveling and mining it. there's the Freemen, but I think even they are considered to have arrived sometime in the past. It's mostly an uninhabited planet because there's very, very little water on it. It's Dune because it's essentially an entire planet of a wasteland, although there are living creatures on it.
God damn it. God damn it, Jabba. I hate you.
Could you read Jabba's comment for us, well read?
I am well read user. I will be talking about Dune.
There, I think I punished Jabba for writing that.
Okay, and we have another quick question from Hothead Studios. I think this is directed at you, well read, but he asks, would you say this I'm guessing the story was contrived? Did it feel contrived?
Well, Duneshine, maybe you want to answer that?
No, not at all. It is the story that it's setting up. I don't think it's anything you would expect. I mean, unless you know the Dune story, you kind of maybe are familiar with some of the names being presented, but it's more of just it's kind of dull. This first issue, that's the easiest way to describe it, I think.
Well, one thing I noticed when I just flicked through it is it seems there is a lot of main characters in the first issue. We seem to follow various different people. Now, does this story have a clear protagonist? Is the protagonists from the movies involved? Like, how many of the characters from the book and the movie have transferred over to the comic since this is a prequel?
So, as you could guess, it's probably about someone from House Atreides, and this is Leto Atreides, who is still alive in Dune and plays a significant role in that book. So he's essentially the father of the main character of the Dune series. So it's mainly focused on him. The problem with this first issue is he doesn't get introduced till near the end of it, which actually is kind of when the story picks up, I'd say.
Okay. Now, was this Leto Atreides, is that Kyle MacLachlan's character from the Dune movie, or is that a different character? Because I think he's the main character from the movie, correct?
Yeah, well, I'll have to answer that.
Honestly, I don't know. I haven't watched the Dune movie in years, so I have vague recollections of it, and it was mostly David Bowie, looking weird and posing a lot. So.
Yeah, as Ahmed says, Paul is the main guy in the books. This is his father, Leto.
Okay. We have clarification from Amit Rayner, finally contributing something valuable to a stream. Thank you,
But I
Amit.
think, from reading this, I would say it mostly there's like a story beat, and it'll focus on that and then shift to the next character and location. That's pretty standard, in which this first book does that as well.
Well, did the book appear to have any type of structure? Because it felt like it was jumping from characters, it was jumping from locations. Did you feel that maybe there was a lack of focus in this first issue, and maybe that's why it's coming across a bit I guess contrived was the word that Hothead Studios.
It feels like a novel in that it has to set all of these characters up, and you get the feeling that each of them will be important. But I mean, it doesn't seem like it's lost focus. It just seems this is a little much for a comic, I would say.
Yeah, it feels like the first 45 minutes of like a Final Fantasy JRPG, and there's a lot of discussion and a lot of character introduction. It gives you enough where you kind of understand their motivations a little bit. They have unique personalities that do come through in the dialogue, but it's very introductory and trying to introduce a lot.
If you go back a page, so every time your location changes, it is nice. It tells you where exactly you are, so you don't get lost. So I think that's a helpful addition, at least, especially if you've never read Dune before. You might not know what any of these places are or who's speaking. So at least every time you see that, you kind of know, oh, we've switched to a new location and probably story plot.
Okay. Well, you briefly mentioned dialogue, so I guess we could quickly just touch upon the writing in this first issue. How was the dialogue from the characters? Did you believe what they were saying? Did it sound something like they would say in universe? Did it appear facetious, or was it bland? How would you describe the writing and the dialogue in the first issue? Starting with well read. We'll go with well read.
Um, well, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of dialogue. So, like, here's an example of a page. Um, like I mentioned, I think the characters do come through. They feel unique in the dialogue, and there's a lot of personality and statements that they make that clue you in a little bit to who this character is supposed to be and um, what kind of personality traits they're going to be expressing throughout the story. But there's there's a lot of things that are mentioned, like I said, where it feels like world building. So it's trying to give you a much broader scope that's outside of this one self-encompassed story. It's referencing a lot of things that you're never introduced to. It's mostly just lore and backstories, but it treats it as if you're intimately familiar with all these things. And so it ends up filling the page with a lot of discussion about things that aren't really pertinent to this main story. So you get very wordy and stagnant scenes where characters are just standing around and looking at each other and talking about a lot of things that are
Yep.
very irrelevant.
James Hayes has a comment about the closeness. So there, it should be pointed out when this is the capital city, it does feel very enclosed like that. Though, but when you're on Dune itself, then you get the far expansions and horizons, and you feel like you're in kind of a open space. So it part of this is the scene you're looking at.
This is actually one of the worst ones in terms of dialogue to me. So this Earl is introduced, and he has an established conflict with the Emperor. They shared a romantic muse, and the Emperor was done with her. She was a concubine, and then the Earl decided to marry her. So they already have a conflict. But the Earl is a war hero, and he is very arrogant in the presence of the Emperor. He saved him through some of his actions in battle. So it speaks a lot that I know all of this just by reading these few pages. But then it goes into this whole thing about how he's trying to build larger ships to carry more things. This is going to result in fewer taxes paid, and the emperor is very upset about that because it's affecting the budget of the Imperium, the Empire, and that went on for several panels. So there's a lot of dialogue here that's
I will
unnecessary.
say this is setting up something that will happen in future issues. So it's not useless information. It just might seem confusing at this particular point when you have to read it. I think the problem here is the Emperor first interviews the planetologist who he's sending to Dune, and then right after he interviews this guy, and that's just a lot of talking, all placed right in the middle of this issue, and it's a little bit too much, I think, right at the beginning here. To have all that talking just be and all that information just be slammed into you.
And
No,
you
sorry,
mentioned
continue.
just quickly, you mentioned a protagonist. I think the planetologist to me came off as the relatable protagonist in this story because Leto from House Arterius wasn't very relatable and did have a very brief introduction.
Yeah, I think you probably agree when we get to the second issue. The first issue doesn't really present much of him except for he's the rich kid, the rich duke's son. And that's about all you know about him in this first issue.
Okay. Well, well read previously mentioned that all the characters' dialogue made them feel unique and different from each other. Would you agree, Doonshine?
Yeah.
Does the planetologist feels different to the Emperor?
Yeah.
The Emperor feels different to the Duke?
Yeah, like if you didn't see the panels, you could tell a different person's talking. So these are competent writers. So writing dialogue, everything sounds good, is well written. You get a different voice for each piece of dialogue. The only people that may sound the same might be the two dukes, but they're in two different locations. So I didn't try to compare them, but they're friends, so perhaps that would make sense why they might sound the same and have a similar position in society. But everyone else, you probably, if I gave a line of dialogue to Well Read, he probably could tell me which character spoke it without any identifying phrases or whatever in it.
Except for the Emperor, I felt like he was the flattest character in the
Yeah, but I
entire
think
story.
he's supposed to seem flat for various reasons. Like he's just indifferent to everything, kind of, but that might just be me.
Okay, Villeneuve has a comment from the chat. They ask, well, they say, you probably need Princess Irulan to set the stage and make things more clear at the beginning. Like the almost universally hated, not by me, tacked on opening to Lynch's Dune. Are any of you familiar with what Villeneuve's talking about there?
You have to ask Well Read, you saw the movie.
I'm going to become the authority on the Dune movie, even though I haven't seen it in ages. I know that it went through several reshoots because the story was extremely lacking. I don't know that the added scene helped very much. I remember it being um, kind of a spectacle, kind of glossy, not really giving a lot of it needed information. So I don't know if necessarily anything that the Dune movie does would help any of this story. I
Well,
don't I don't know this character though, Princess Irulan. Maybe you're familiar with her, Duneshine.
yes, she doesn't really get she's involved in Dune, and then she's more important in the sequels to Dune. She is the daughter of the emperor of at that time, so this is like the granddaughter or grandniece of this current emperor.
Okay, just going back to the protagonists, the hero, I guess the characters in this book. Was there any particular one character that you felt invested in? You mentioned the planetologist. Was there any characters at all that you felt would be the main character, or it was very evenly spread out across the book, focusing on all these different characters?
I think the planetologist is the most interesting in this first issue. You just get introduced to the Harkonnen. Of course, he's not relatable at all because he's evil. The Emperor you won't relate to. His son is sort of evil because there's his friend who's trying to plot for him to kill him, and then Duke Atreides is kind of vainglorious and indifferent, and then his son you just barely get to meet. So that's about all. It's not too many characters, but it's just it's in a single issue. It can kind of seem overwhelming, but yeah, the planetologist is the only one that you kind of get a feeling for as a normal human being. The rest are kind of weird science fiction type people.
But do you feel like this first issue got you invested in the planetologist? Is he a character that you'd like to see continue on in the story? Did it successfully make an impact?
Um, do you want to answer?
I can't really answer because I didn't read this issue first, so
I would say honestly no. Um, I mean, I felt like there was a lot of story being discussed that I wasn't introduced to. The characters, while they're well written, they're not very interesting, to be quite honest. They don't have clear objectives being stated, and as I mentioned earlier, palace intrigue is not the most fascinating thing without something to anchor you, some relatable common man going through this kind of very pompous, um, established environment. And the scientist that comes in here, um, he's just he's just very insecure, and he's sent on a mission, and he's unsure of why he's being sent there. And his character was kind of confusing to me anyway. He came from a harsh planet before this one, but yet he acted very trepidatious. He didn't seem like he was very weathered and ready for his next challenge. And the Emperor just kind of threw him into studying Dune without really establishing why. He was just going to go there and explore the planet for reasons. Then you had at the beginning one of this one of these families that are apparently very big in the Dune lore, Harkonnen. So Baron Vladimir is there and he's digging up the spice, and the mine blows up, and all he does is curse the fact that they have to mine spice. Um, you have the Duke, or sorry, the Earl come in, who yells at the Emperor. He's building technology on this planet called Nine that apparently the Emperor is not allowed to have any oversight over because the development of new technology is considered sacred and doesn't allow for government oversight so that it continue to be creative. There's a little side story that ends up being important in the end of a crown prince who wants to kill the emperor, and that comes up at the very end of the series. And then there's Leto Atreides, who you don't care about at all because he's just a naive kid sitting in the theater learning about how great his family is.
Okay, well, there's a lot to unpack there, but we have a few comments in the chat. Simple Jack says, "This review is horrible." So another great show by us. Thank you, Simple Jack. We actually have another issue coming up after this one, which I suppose we better get along to. Yucky Gum says, "Bedtime, everyone. Later all. Good night, Yucky Gum." And James Hayes seems to agree with the both of you and says, "I'm not sure the Dune characters ever hooked anyone. There were tons, and they were really just pieces of the plot. Dune was liked for plot more than the characters." Okay, and Jabba updates us saying everybody is watching Dark Gift instead. Well, now I feel insulted. This is terrible. This review must be horrible.
I retire.
So I guess we'll move along to the second issue soon. But I guess, was there anything else you wanted to comment about the writing? I'd like to ask about the art before we move on. But if you have any additional comments on the writing or the plot of the characters, I guess you could mention that now.
Yeah, I think we said everything that needs to be said about it.
Well read?
Yeah, I mean, I went through all the characters and the reasons why I thought that they weren't very engaging.
Yeah, I would say it's almost kind of a chore to read this first issue again. I didn't even really want to read it. It's like, well, there's nothing happening in this first issue.
So Vilnid asks, did F off well read find this comic less confusing than Bigfoot Bill?
Ironically, I did. I at least understood the characters in this comic. They had logical reasons for what they were doing. It's just you had to go parse through a lot of information to get to those reasons. But that's fine. It just doesn't make for a very engaging read.
Okay. I guess just before we move off onto issue 2, any comments on the art? Was it consistent the way throughout? Was the emotions on the faces presented well? Did you feel like it flowed and told a story if there was no dialogue at all? Did it service the book?
Well, I guess I felt like there were a lot of panels on each page, but I guess that was being done with the intention of telling as much story as possible. There weren't many action set pieces in this first issue. I did want to mention, though, I felt like the coloring, I have an example here I can show.
Yeah, sure, bring it up.
Yeah, it's like it was done with charcoal pencil. Like, it's very dirty and grainy. You see a lot of lines. It's not clean at all. I'm not sure if this is normal for comics now, but I just found this to be very unclean, with the pencils being just adequate, in my opinion.
Okay. I noticed a lot of blues and purples. Is this what the kids call bisexual lighting?
This is the Imperial Capital. I think what you'll see is this coloring and style actually works very well once we get to a desert planet. I mean, the coloring seemed fine to me, at least for what it was trying to do. I mean, there's almost a lot of dust in the air, which is, I think, what's going to be intentional. I mean, obviously there shouldn't be on the Imperial planet, but...
Well, I'm noticing that middle left panel, the close-up of the man's face, and it seems like the art is...
Sorry, I'll just go through the guided view. Is this one?
I think it would be the next one. It does look like the emotion is conveyed pretty well in the art. I mean, this guy's obviously sneering and plotting. Doonshine, do you feel like the faces were up to scratch? I know we sometimes focus on the faces in other reviews.
Yeah, I think they were what you expect, and particularly the men get a lot of wrinkles and facial expressions, so you can always see what they're doing, whether it's this guy or the Earl that was talking to the Emperor earlier. The only ones I think are maybe a little washed out are when we are on Atreides. I guess because they're supposed to be happy, good people, so you can't put as many wrinkles on their face or something.
Okay. We have some more comments in the chat. James Hayes says, the art wasn't sharp enough. Look at an EVS 2-page spread and look at how clunky and almost empty the spreads were here. It was uninteresting. This will get me into trouble. You can try to excuse it, but when it comes to comics, the narrative serves the art for storytelling, not always the other way around. It's a visual medium. So some strong opinions there by James, but always welcome for feedback. We're getting to the 40-minute mark now, and we've spent, I guess, a lot of time on this first issue. Did you have any final thoughts or comments before we move on to issue 2? Anything else you'd like to discuss?
I think I've mentioned everything that I wanted to say about the first one.
How about you, Doonshine?
Yeah, I'm good.
Are you good? Well, you're not good. You're a giant sandworm. That's the opposite of good. You're a monster.
I think it's very good.
Okay. Well, okay, moving along to issue 2. So, issue 2, did it repeat some of the, I guess, not mistakes, but was it a stronger showing in issue 2?
Well, the thing with issue 2 is things happen, and it's pretty clear what each story beat. Each ends with what the point of each story arc is, whereas the first one is like, well, what was the point of this piece of story? Whereas this one, everything ends. It feels like an ending. It presents you with either an ending or a question for what's going to happen next. And I think it's just there's 4 pieces of story, 4 characters. Yeah, I think it works actually rather well.
Okay. Well, Red, you seemed not really impressed with the first issue. Was the second issue an improvement on the first, or do you feel it was much for muchness and suffered from the same problems?
It was a vast improvement. It had, it used the visual storytelling aspect of the comic book much more effectively. It's just, again, things seemed a bit pointless, but at least it utilized the art far more than the dialogue.
Okay. We have a celebrity in the chat. The Quaff says, "Hey everyone," and then he asks, "Is Frank Herbert coming on the show later?"
I'm sorry to tell you, we don't have a Ouija board, so probably not.
Okay, that might be a hard get. All right, and how about the artwork? Was the artwork consistent from issue 1 to 2? Is it the same artist working on issue 1 and 2?
Yeah, it's the same artist, yeah.
Okay.
Dev Pramonic. I don't know who that is.
Okay. And it was very much in the same style. Nothing was changed. There was no noticeable differences that you saw.
Yeah, I mean, the color palette changes because of the locations, but other than that.
And we have an example here. So this is Cartag.
So this is the planetologist arriving on the planet.
So the story is very much following the planetologist. He continues his story in issue 2. He was previously asked by the Emperor to go to this planet, and this is his arrival.
So here he meets the Harkonnens. He goes on a Dune worm hunt with the nephew. They succeed, and you see the nephew's an asshole because he gets one of his trackers almost killed, and then we learn something about the worm and how they just kind of disintegrate when they die into like smaller pieces of worm almost. So this is just kind of presenting the planet to you and kind of showing the curiosity the planetologist has for the planet. Ahmed, yes, this does looks much better than 499.
Ahmed also says, post the link in the chat so Jabba can come on. Well, just like every review, Ahmed, I think the link will be posted in
The
the chat
Quaff
once
is
we're done.
disappointed, so we've disappointed another audience member.
We're not Jesus, Quaff. We can't bring some guy back to life just so he can come on here and give a review. What do you want from us? It's
I
beyond
mean,
our
maybe
power.
we could get his son. I don't know.
This review show kills people, Quaff. It doesn't resurrect them.
Yeah.
But anyway, well, Red, I really want to pick on you since you seem to express a lot of opinions about the first issue. What did the second issue do better than the first? Why was it an improvement? You mentioned it was a vast improvement. I'm just curious why that is. What did it do differently?
Well, first, it had half as much dialogue and maybe a third fewer characters being introduced. And the characters that were introduced, I don't think were very significant. They were mainly there to serve some of the action set pieces that were happening. So, like Duneshine mentioned, one was the nephew from this house, Harkonnen. But he was mainly just a brutish, brainless asshole that wanted to blow up a worm. And so we spent several pages on that. Another character that's introduced almost outside of the main story is a young boy who's been, his whole family has been captured
And
by
his
the
name is
Harkonnen.
Duncan Idaho, chat. You might recognize that name.
Yeah.
What's the relevance of Duncan Idaho? Just to interrupt quickly.
He plays a part in the main series.
Okay.
So he's basically a captive by this Harkonnen family, and they hunt him for sport, with the reward being that his family would be freed if he manages to escape.
Okay. Well, that is interesting.
And
Is
then-
this
and then-
just specific to that planet, or is this a rule that exists throughout the Imperium?
No, this is
Slavery
to
and-
show you the Harkonnens are assholes.
Okay.
And so at the end of it, the nephew, who is a failure of the Dune hunt, comes back, says, "Oh, this guy's great." And he says, "I'm not a number. My name is Duncan Idaho." And it's like, "Oh, no, you're not." And then he kills his family. So that's how it ends. It's so the reason they set up the nephew to be an asshole. So, he's a real asshole when he comes back and just kills his family.
Okay. Well, you mentioned two separate hunts. They were hunting this giant sandworm and hunting a young boy. Let's start with the sandworm. Was it action packed? Was there a level of tension while they were hunting the worm? How did that translate into the story? Was it interesting to read?
I mean, I thought so because I know enough about how it works. So it's like, oh, I got this thumper sort of like pounds the ground to make vibrations and attract the worm. And then the trick is to get it to swallow all the explosives they plant around it. But the Harkonnen guy's an asshole, so he just kicks the guy out with his equipment. It's like, oh, you better set it up fast so it doesn't eat you.
Well read. Any comments on the hunt? Did you feel a level of tension? Were you worried about the character who got kicked out of the hovercraft?
No.
Okay.
I thought it was him, like, just on a balcony with binoculars watching one of the servants go out and actually do the hunting so that he could retrieve a trophy for his lord. And he was just mad when the worm disintegrated, so he didn't get his trophy. I mean, it's interesting that it continues to build on the Dune lore. Maybe if I read the other books in the series, I'd be a little bit more fascinated with the added details that are being given in this story. But to be very honest, I think the only thing that I found interesting thus far in these two issues were the sisterhood that get introduced in this issue. It seems to be the only thing that culminates to any kind of conflict or tension down the road. Everything else just seemed to be very, I don't know, perfunctory, kind of just much ado about nothing. And but that seemed to actually have a little bit of intrigue in it. the Sisterhood.
Okay. So the Sisterhood was probably the most, I guess it was your Barbie Yaga moment of this comic, right? That was the part you were more interested in?
It's about the same amount of pages, too. It's 4 pages. Oh, wait, no. 5. No, 4. 4 pages.
Okay.
So Well-Read enjoyed 4 pages.
So do you think what that scene with the worm was trying to say is it was setting up the worm as this monster, this creature that's desired to be hunted, but the way the hunter was treating his servant, perhaps he was the real monster? Was it trying to say something or express some type of morality with that scene, did you feel? Or it was just a worthless
definitely
throwaway?
trying to show you this is the Harkonnen nephew is a really horrible person who doesn't care for others. Like, his own glory and sport matters more to him than anything else.
All right. Moving on, I guess, to the second hunt of the book. You mentioned a small boy, and he's participating in these hunts to win the freedom of his family. Well read. What is the motivation for this little boy to save his family? Why does he care?
Yeah, I mean, he's had a father all this time, and only now, to serve the story, does he care about saving his father's life. I mean, how contrived and artificial. I'm confused by this.
Well, of course, we all know that Well-Read has no family. He's actually a robotic bunny that was built by the Pentagon to commit psyops on you all by boring you to death with these comic book reviews. It's a demoralization tactic.
I almost feel like that question, Peeg, was sarcastic.
No, it was genuine. So here we have on the page, I'm guessing this is the young boy who's being hunted?
Yeah, so this is the Harkonnen home planet, so he's just kind of running through a city with sci-fi stuff. And he thinks he escapes, but then of course he doesn't, so he gets thrown back in the prison.
Now, did you both feel that the stakes were more raised with this hunt? That maybe it was easier to empathize with a young boy compared to a giant sand monster? Was there a much greater level of tension when reading this?
I sympathize with the giant sandworm more because it's a god and this is just a boy.
Okay. Well read. Did you feel like this hunt was maybe done a little bit better than the sandworm hunt? That you feel this, were you invested in this more? Did you care about this young boy and his family?
Yes, I mean, this did add a bit of humanity to the story, which I think has been very lacking up to this point. And it's done well, and it has a tragic culmination. So I definitely cared more about the boy than any of the other characters we've seen thus far. It's just I didn't see the strong relevance to the story, but hopefully that gets explored a little bit further in the later issues.
James Saley says 8 panels per page. I will say that the panel layout, while not incredibly boring, like 9 evenly sized panels, it's not that exciting. It's the white gutters, various designs. It's competent but not exciting. It's not an Ethan Van Sciver creativity with panel layout and placement.
Okay. I'm looking at the lettering, and the lettering seems like it's well done. The laser blasts there going past his head, and the whoosh of what I assume is a train.
Was there any other the grainy stuff you just went through that Well-Read doesn't like?
Okay. So let's talk about the quality of the I guess of the product, not the physical, but the quality of the production design. So the lettering, you mentioned the gutters, Moonshine. You felt like that added something to the...
No.
Okay.
I mean, it's I just say it's kind of boring is what it is. It's not atrocious or bad. It's just if you have to put white gutters between every panel, it's kind of it's the minimal thing you should do. So generally, you should probably do more than that.
We actually have a very special guest in the chat, because this little boy who was being hunted grew up to be Testify HD, and he says End this now.
I think what he's saying is end it now and restart it because I missed so much. I want to know what's happening in the story. He doesn't want to be spoiled.
I think Testify is traumatized by us digging into his childhood history here of being hunted on an alien world.
I think this guy is not Testify because he can use his legs. So.
well, this is how he loses his legs, maybe.
This is one of 10 different ways that Testify has lost his legs throughout his life.
This is the Testify origin story.
Yes.
Yeah. So the last part of the story is just Leto going to the planet Z or 9. I don't know how you think it's 9.
9, yes.
Maybe the chat knows. Oh, you know. It's not. Okay.
IX.
IX, yes. So he's going to the planet, the Foster, effectively, with his father's war buddy. And when he arrives there, it's just a wasteland. And he's like, where is everyone? And then this transport pulls off.
Okay.
And that is the end of the book.
Well, the Sisterhood.
We already talked about the Sisterhood, though.
Well Red wants to talk about them again, Duneshine. Mind your manners. I'm hosting this show here.
I think he just wanted to look at the Mother Superior's legs. I think that's what's going on.
Okay.
Vicky is not that old.
She's like 10 years younger. That's true.
Yeah.
And I guess they have spice, so she could actually be a lot older.
Okay. Before
maybe
Duneshine,
Vicky has spice. Oh, never thought about that.
Before Duneshine rudely interrupted you, Well Red, you mentioned the Sisterhood. You'd like to talk about the Sisterhood some more?
Well, I don't know, Duneshine, do you think it's too spoilerish to get into the Sisterhood?
No, because it's going to be brought up again, so in future issues. So
the Sisterhood is this, religious cult that believes in selective breeding for the purposes of genetic engineering. For 1,000 years, they've mapped out the genealogy of particular peoples, and they're looking for the perfect genetic blending to bring to life some prophet that has been foretold in their belief system. And they've accumulated this mapping, they've traced it down to individuals, and they've stated that one of the sisters has to breed with from this Baron from the House Harkonnen that was introduced in the first issue, Vladimir. And so this coupling will produce offspring that will eventually lead to the birth of Kwisatz Haderach, who I guess is some prophet that they're hoping would
he's
come to
Superman,
life.
effectively. In the classical sense, he will like transcend humanity.
Yeah, this is Kal-El, basically. And that's how the Superman storyline intersects with Dune.
Okay. Well,
how about that?
It sounds like much like the first issue. There's a lot introduced in this as well. So far, I've heard at least 4 different running plots. So we have the planetologist coming to the planet and getting settled in. Then we also go to him going on this worm hunt, along with the hunt of the young boy, and this sisterhood trying to bring about Superman Space Jesus via what is basically eugenics. If you don't know what that word is, look it up, which it was practiced by the Nazis. Did it feel like this issue was cluttered as well? Did all these different storylines flow on well together, or?
I think if you use the novels and the way these are written, it's fine because it's one story plot and then it just moves to the next. So you understand, this will be addressed in the next issue. So that they're all pretty much self-contained stories. So you have 4 self-contained stories in this issue, and I think they're a little bit better placed than the last issue because I think the last issue kind of jumped back and forth a couple times.
Okay, well read. Did you feel the second issue was too cluttered?
No, I even though it introduced a lot, it was executed much better than the first issue. it wasn't as cluttered at all.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. Like, if you didn't read the first issue and read this one first, I think you'd be perfectly fine. In fact, I'd almost suggest that you don't really even need the first issue.
Do you feel like the story would work better as a full graphic novel? That way, it's a long read the whole way throughout. It's almost like reading a book, and that maybe the floppy medium of 24 pages makes it feel cramped, or
I actually no. Whereas Berserker, you kind of get frustrated because you get pieces of it. This, I think, it there's an arc to each little section that seems complete. I mean, you realize there's going to be more addressed afterwards, but I think you feel satisfied after each little story vignette.
okay.
I don't know. Red didn't like it, so maybe he doesn't.
Well, I agree that the vignettes do close nicely. So it's true that that they're stacked well together. I don't think each issue ends on necessarily the best cliffhanger. Like, I thought the one for this issue was really strange. Leto gets dropped off on the planet, and it's Planet 9. His father sent him there to work with the Earl.
Yeah, James Hay says it's a story for Dune fans. In fact, I disagree with that. So I'd say it's more for the casual audience, because that the House of Atreides and the prequels are actually more straightforward than Dune. So this is something you could probably pick up and enjoy if you like space opera type things. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing really crazy going on. There's all this like the sisterhood intrigue and stuff that is presented well enough that you'll understand it without even knowing any of the backstory from the mainline book.
I was going to ask that. So Duneshine feels that someone who's unfamiliar with the Dune universe could pick this up and maybe still enjoy it or get something out of it without having been exposed to the prior material. Well read, do you agree? I mean, I know you mentioned you'd seen the movie, but did you find this was easy to follow, not being an expert with the source material?
I did actually. There's a lot of terminology to wade through, but it doesn't burden you with the expectation of being familiar with it to be able to follow the story. It's mentioned, but it's not immediately pertinent.
Yeah, Mr. Yanafui says it's very boring for Dune fans, which Dune fans I think are kind of nuts, so it's probably a true statement.
And Vilnid says, read the Bill Sienkiewicz Dune comic magazine. It's amazing. Okay. Anything else you'd like to mention on this second issue? I'd like to go into the actual quality of the books themselves. I think, Duneshine, you mentioned you had physical copies, but
Yeah.
would you like to? Is there anything else you'd like to mention about the story, the characters, the art, the coloring on this second issue before we dive into the actual quality of the books themselves?
Not only that, as I mentioned in the first issue, I think the coloring, kind of the grainy look of it, works a lot better once you kind of get into the desert planets and maybe even the Harkonnen planet, because it's like kind of an industrial kind of grimy town.
Well read. Anything else you'd like to discuss on issue 2?
I mean, the colors and the panel layout, all of the arrangement, it's pretty much consistent with the first issue. I do like that they seem to use a bit more flashbacks in the second issue, and those are colored nicely. They have a green hue, so it actually utilizes the art to tell the story, which I appreciated. But it still has this charcoal pencil coloring that I just find off-putting. I know it does work well for the desert landscapes, but it doesn't work as well inside of a starship, which occasionally that's where they're located, and you still have the same texture in the color. So.
Okay. Well, I guess moving on, just to touch briefly upon the quality of the books themselves, Duneshine. Newsprint, glossy paper, how are they? Describe them to us.
It's probably some of Boom Studios' best designed books. The covers aren't just kind of paper; it's actually a nice heavy cardstock. And the pages, there seems to be some finish, but I don't know if I'd call it glossy. They're pretty thick pages as well, and it's, I guess, a little bit higher priced. It's a $5 book, but these are some of the best books that Boom Studios has put out, I think, in terms of just quality of the product itself.
Now, did you feel that your $5 was well spent? That it was worth it?
I mean, I think just what you'd expect for a comic of this quality, it's going to be $5 nowadays, because the shit that Marvel and DC puts out is $4. So if it's higher quality than that, you expect it's probably going to be at least $1 more.
Hothead Studios asks a matte interior.
I don't know if it's matte either. I think it's slightly glossy. It'd be the way I describe it. It's almost just neutral. It's neither glossy nor matte.
Yeah, I know John Delarose prefers a matte interior to glossy.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, it's not super glossy. If it is gloss, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's not a finish on it. I assume there has to be, or the ink would come off. So I'm not really sure what the finish is.
Okay, and well read. I guess you don't have the physicals, but we could talk briefly about the digital. How was the digital on Comixology? It was nice and clear, high resolution. Any issues?
Yeah, I love this feature of where you can do guided view, and it really lets you focus in on each panel, and then you follow the story along as it was intended, just by clicking through the panels. So you're not distracted at all. There's no temptation to glance over at any of the other upcoming pieces of story. You just focus on what's the next immediate thing in the sequence of the book. So I really enjoy this. Like I love reading it this way. This was really a nice change for me.
It's definitely a superior method than to like a PDF of a book and just scroll through the page. That I find that very obnoxious to try to read a comic that way. The only thing worse would be like if it was printed right to left, but I had to read it left to right.
Right. Yeah, it would
left
break
to right, right to left, left to right, right to left. Anyway, I agree. I think Comixology is actually pretty innovative with the design they have here. So I guess we've talked about the production quality. Is it time to move on to final thoughts and ratings and what you guys thought overall?
Sure.
Unless there was anything else you wanted to bring up, Duneshine, anything?
I agree with Hothead Studios. I still prefer analog.
Analog's always the
I
best.
say digital is very nice for these reviews, so we can at least show you things, because taking pictures is just a pain unless you have a very specific camera set up to get good pictures of comics.
Well, Testify has a message for Risey Lee. He says, feedback alert at Risey Lee. Rosetta is ready for her pre-sleep appetizer. And Risey says she can starve for a day, so she will be fine at Testify. That's great, guys. That's very great. No comments on Dune?
A lot of love in the chat.
Well, as always. So, well read. Let's start with you. Final thoughts, final verdict. Give us the skinny. Break it all down to us. Dune issue 1 and 2. How'd you feel about it?
Definitely need to be read together. If you just pick up the first issue, you'll assume that this series is going nowhere, and is just going to be a tedious chore to get through. But the minute you get the second issue in your hands, you can see that a lot of the story is established in the first issue, and they quickly move past that phase of it. Then it really picks up and it gets interesting. The situations are a bit more engaging, so I would I would definitely be interested to continue reading the series and seeing where it goes after this. It established a lot of nice ideas here that I would like to follow up on.
Okay, so I was going to ask if you would continue the series based on what you've read. Would you recommend it to a friend that enjoys Dune, and to a friend that's maybe never heard of it? Would you recommend to both, either, neither?
I would recommend it to someone who enjoys Dune, and I would recommend it to a specific type of comic reader. Um, I would tell them immediately. I think somebody else put it very well in the chat, might have been James Hayes, that it's not so much about the characters, it's about the plot. And if you're not invested in the individual characters in a Game of Thrones, you just like to see where all of these storylines are headed. This seems to be following a very similar pattern. Um, but it might deviate, and you might get a Sansa Stark eventually pop up in the story, which would be, a nice thing to be added in.
Okay, would you like to issue a score? I like to issue my 7 out of 10. Would back again. Did you want to give it anything out of 10?
In terms of what I thought was an effective comic execution, I thought the first issue was a 5. The second issue I found a lot more shallow in terms of story, but much better executed just as a comic book. So there I'd probably give it a 6.
Okay, yeah, very nice. Very nice. So 50-50 on the first issue, improvement on the second issue. All right, Duneshine, we know how much you love telling us your numbers. Give us your rating. Issue 1 and issue 2, 7 out of 10. Would read again?
I would suggest to the audience just skip issue 1 and go right to issue 2 if you want to try this out. I'm glad I didn't read issue 1 first, because I probably just would have stopped reading the series. It's rather dull and pointless, because I don't think you need anything you got from issue 1 really in issue 2. I'm trying to think if there's... I guess the Imperial plot's the only thing you might miss out on. Yeah, like the planetologist getting orders to go to the planet, who cares? Leto having his father tell him to go to 9, who cares? He's going there in the second issue, and Duncan doesn't get introduced until this issue, so the second issue is vastly superior. I think it's rather interesting.
And now I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway for the chat. I assume you enjoy this series because you have continued it. I believe you're reading this as it's ongoing. So
yeah,
obviously...
I've caught up to where they are currently, which is issue 6, which of a 12-issue series. I imagine if it does well, they'll probably go to House Harkonnen, which is the second book in this prequel series, but I don't know that.
And would you, again, same question as well, Red, would you recommend it to a friend, someone who likes Dune, someone who's never heard of Dune, a comic book reader?
I wouldn't say someone who likes Dune. I'd probably recommend it to someone that likes the prequel series, which there are actually quite a few people. The mainline Dune series of the first book's good, the second is kind of okay, and then it just goes off the rails. I know lots of people that just never finish the mainline series because it gets too weird and nonsensical.
Okay, and I guess you don't like giving scores, but I'm going to pick your brain just for a few more minutes. Dune compared to Berserker. You enjoy reading Dune more than Berserker? You're more interested in Dune than Berserker? How does it compare to Boom's other book that we've reviewed on this show?
Well, the problem with Berserker is I don't know where it's going, so Berserker has the potential to be better than this, but currently Dune has a story that's more interesting. I mean, part of the problem with Dune is I know where it's going to end up, so I don't think I'm going to be surprised. Potentially, I could be surprised by Berserker.
And I'm guessing you're more interested in the world of Dune than, say, Carmen America and White Lily and Bigfoot Bill.
Yeah, those I have to appreciate for the art or just maybe the character moments.
Okay. Well, I think we've talked about all we can with Dune. If there was anything well read or Duneshine you'd like to say in closing, if there was anything you'd like to add, or maybe you'd like to tell me how much I sucked as a host, you could always do that as well. And I guess we could open up the chat to see what they think, what
I
they
think-
thought of Dune, or what they think of us. I'm
I
sure
think you
Testify
want-
would love